Welcome to Eternal Darkness, where nightmares come to life. I'll be your host through these twisted tales tonight. Before we descend into the shadows, remember to like and subscribe to join our growing community of horror enthusiasts. Get comfortable, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself as we begin our journey into the unknown. 15 years I'd been leading hiking groups through those mountains, and I thought I'd seen everything the wilderness had to offer. Every Saturday from April through October, I'd take groups of 8 to 12 people along the same network of trails, pointing out wildlife, teaching them about the local flora, and making sure nobody twisted an ankle on the rocky paths. The work was predictable, safe, and honest. I liked it that way. That particular Saturday in late July started like any other. My group consisted of 9 people, mostly office workers from the city looking to spend their weekend breathing fresh air instead of recycled office ventilation. There was a married couple in their 50s, 3 younger women who worked together and were constantly taking photos, 2 brothers in their 30s trying to one-up each other with their hiking gear, and a quiet guy in his 40s who kept to himself. Standard group, normal people looking for a normal experience. We set out at 8 in the morning, the temperature already climbing into the 70s. The sky was cloudless, that deep blue you only get in the mountains during summer. The trail wound through a mixed forest of pine and aspen, and every so often we'd break through the tree cover to see the valley spreading out below us, patchwork farms and the occasional roof glinting in the sunlight. I led them at an easy pace, stopping every 20 minutes or so to let the slower hikers catch their breath. I pointed out a red-tailed hawk circling overhead, showed them fresh deer tracks in the soft earth at the trail's edge, and explained how to identify poison oak so they'd know to avoid it. The group was in good spirits, laughing and chatting among themselves. One of the brothers made a joke about the other one's expensive hiking boots already giving him blisters. Everyone laughed. It was exactly the kind of day I'd led 1,000 times before. By 11:30 we'd covered about 4 miles, and I could see some of them starting to flag. The sun was strong now, and even in the shade of the trees, the heat was building. Time for our scheduled break at Clearwater Stream, or at least that's what the local outfitters had always called it. The stream ran year-round, fed by snowmelt from higher elevations, and the water was always cold and clean. I'd been bringing groups there for over a decade. "All right, folks, we're going to take a break here," I announced, gesturing to the stream ahead. The sound of running water was already audible, that pleasant burbling that promised relief from the heat. "Fill up your water bottles, splash some water on your faces, and we'll have lunch." The group practically rushed forward, dropping their packs with sighs of relief. The married couple immediately sat on a flat boulder, pulling out sandwiches. The 3 women headed straight for the water, kneeling at the edge to dip their hands in and squeal about how cold it was. The brothers started arguing about whose fancy water filtration system was better. The quiet guy sat alone against a tree, methodically unpacking his lunch. I watched them for a moment, doing my usual head count and making sure everyone was accounted for. 9 people, all present, all safe. Good. I pulled out my own water bottle and took a long drink, then grabbed an energy bar from my pack. The younger brother with the expensive boots called over to me. "Hey, is this water safe to drink straight, or should I use my filter?" It was a reasonable question. People worry about Jare bacteria, all sorts of things that can make you sick. In 15 years, I'd never had anyone get sick from Clearwater Stream, but I always checked upstream before letting anyone drink from it. Just protocol. Basic safety. "Let me take a look upstream," I told him. "Give me 5 minutes and I'll let you know." "Thanks, man. I don't want to lug this filter around if I don't need to. But I also don't want to spend the rest of the weekend in the bathroom, you know?" I smiled. Smart thinking. Be right back. I left them there in their little clusters, eating and resting and enjoying the shade. The sound of their voices faded as I walked upstream, following the bank. The stream here was maybe 8 feet across, shallow enough that you could see the smooth stones on the bottom through the clear water. Fish darted in and out of the shadows. Everything looked normal. I walked slowly, scanning the water and banks. Usually I'd find nothing more interesting than some leaves that had fallen in, maybe a branch. Once I'd found a plastic water bottle some careless hiker had dropped. I'd packed it out, of course. The worst thing I'd ever found was a dead squirrel that had probably fallen from a tree, and even that was on the bank, not in the water itself. 50 yards upstream. That was my usual checkpoint. far enough to see if anything was contaminating the water before it reached the group. The smell hit me first. I was maybe 40 yards upstream when the breeze shifted, carrying something rancid and organic toward me. Death has a specific smell. Anyone who's spent enough time in the woods knows it. Sweet and rotting and wrong. I stopped walking, suddenly alert. My eyes scanned the stream ahead, looking for the source. At first, I didn't see it. The sunlight was dappling through the trees, creating patterns of light and shadow on the water. But then something resolved in my vision. Something that didn't belong. Something sitting in the middle of the stream, water flowing around it. I walked closer, my boots crunching on the rocky bank. The smell got stronger. Flies buzzed in the air, thick and persistent. It was a deer's head. Not a skull, bleached white and clean. A head with flesh still on it, rotting in the summer heat. The water flowing around it was probably carrying God knows what downstream toward where my group sat eating their lunch. I stopped about 10 feet away, my stomach churning. I've seen plenty of dead animals in the wilderness. It's part of nature, part of the cycle of life and death. I've come across deer killed by mountain lions, elk that had died in the winter and been scavenged by bears and coyotes. But this was different. The head was sitting upright in the shallow water, wedged between two rocks so it wouldn't wash downstream. That was the first thing that struck me as wrong. It hadn't just washed up there naturally. Someone had placed it. The second thing was the cut. The neck had been severed cleanly, not torn by predators, not ripped apart by scavengers. Cut. The edge was smooth, surgical almost, like someone had used an extremely sharp blade and knew exactly what they were doing. I could see the cross-section of the vertebrae, pale bone against dark flesh. The deer's eyes were clouded over, filmy and white. Its mouth hung open slightly. Flies crawled over the face, in and out of the nostrils. The fur was matted and slick. Maggots writhed in the exposed flesh at the neck. The antlers, it was a young buck, judging by the size, were still intact, 6 points, maybe 2 or 3 years old. How long had it been here? A day? 2? Long enough to rot in the summer heat. Long enough to contaminate the water. I stood there, my mind racing through possibilities. A hunter? But why would any hunter cut off a deer's head and leave it in a stream? Hunters take trophy heads, sure, but they preserve them, mount them. They don't just discard them in the water to rot. And the cut was too clean, too precise. This wasn't field dressing gone wrong. Teenagers messing around? Maybe some kids had found a roadkill deer and thought it would be funny to leave the head where hikers would find it. But we were 4 miles from the nearest road. That's a long way to carry a rotting deer head just for a prank. And again, that cut. That wasn't something kids with a pocket knife could do. Someone with experience. Someone who knew what they were doing. Someone who had access to the right tools and knew how to use them. Someone who had deliberately placed this here, in this stream, where people came regularly. A warning? But a warning of what? And to whom? I looked around, scanning the forest. The trees pressed in close on both sides of the stream. Anyone could be watching from the shadows. The birds had gone quiet. I hadn't noticed until that moment, but the cheerful chirping from earlier had stopped. The only sounds were the water and the buzzing of flies. My skin was crawling, not from fear exactly, but from the profound wrongness of what I was looking at. This was deliberate. This was someone sending a message. I just didn't know what the message was or who it was meant for. And I couldn't tell my group the truth. I had 9 people sitting 50 yards downstream, drinking water, eating lunch, completely unaware. If I told them what I'd found, if I explained that someone had butchered a deer and left its head to rot in the water they'd been about to drink from, they would panic. Some of them would want to leave immediately. Others might insist we call the police, which would mean waiting here for hours while authorities came out to investigate. And what if whoever did this was still around? What if they were watching us right now? My job was to keep these people safe. That was my first priority. My only priority. Getting them out of here calmly and quickly. I walked back downstream, forcing my expression into something neutral and calm. Years of experience guiding groups had taught me how to mask my emotions, how to project confidence even when I was uncertain. The group looked up as I approached, their faces relaxed and content. "All right, folks. I need you to pack up your things," I said, keeping my tone even and authoritative. "We're going to head back to headquarters." The married couple looked confused. Already, we just got here. Yeah, I know, and I'm sorry about that. But I've spotted signs of bear activity upstream. I gestured vaguely in the direction I'd come from. Fresh tracks, some disturbed ground. And this time of year, late July, it's breeding season. The males get aggressive and unpredictable. It's not safe to be in this area right now. That got their attention. The three women stood up immediately, looking around nervously. One of them asked, "How close is it?" "Hard to say," I replied, which was true enough in a sideways kind of way. Could be a mile away, could be closer. Point is, I don't want to take any chances. We're going to pack up calmly and efficiently, and we'll head back the way we came. Stay together. No wandering off, and we'll be fine. Bears don't typically attack groups. The brothers started shoving their gear back into their packs with urgent movements. The quiet guy had already stood up, his lunch half-eaten, his face expressionless. The married couple looked disappointed, but began gathering their things. "What about our water?" the younger brother asked. "We still need to fill up." "Use what you have," I told him. "There's water back at headquarters, and the hike back is only a couple hours. You'll be fine." As they packed, I did another scan of the forest around us. Nothing moved in the shadows. No sounds except the stream and the rustle of my group getting ready to leave. If someone was out there watching, they were good at staying hidden. Within 5 minutes, everyone was packed and ready. I did a final head count, 9 people, all present, and then started leading them back down the trail. I set a pace that was faster than our leisurely hike out, but not so fast that it would alarm them further. Just quick enough to suggest I was taking the bear threat seriously. As we walked, I kept up a steady stream of chatter, pointing out plants and birds, making small jokes, anything to keep them distracted and calm. The three women were tense at first, jumping at every sound, but gradually they relaxed. The brothers went back to their good-natured bickering. The married couple walked hand in hand, occasionally asking questions about the local wildlife. The hike back felt longer than it should have. Every bend in the trail, I half expected to see something. Another sign, another message, another violation. But there was nothing. Just trees and rocks and the normal sounds of the forest gradually coming back. Birds started singing again. A squirrel chattered at us from a branch. Everything seemed normal. But I couldn't shake the image of that deer's head from my mind. The clean cut. The deliberate placement. The wrongness of it. Someone had done that. Someone had taken the time and effort to butcher that animal, carry its head 4 miles into the wilderness, and place it in a stream where people regularly stop to rest. Why? We reached the trailhead parking lot at 2 in the afternoon. The group was tired but in good spirits, already laughing about how they'd have a story to tell about the bear that almost got them. I helped them load their gear into their cars, accepted their thanks, and watched them drive away. Then I went into the headquarters building and found my boss, a man named Gordon, who'd been running this outfitting business for 30 years. He was in his office, working on paperwork, and looked up when I knocked. "Back early," he observed. "Everything okay?" "Need to talk to you," I said, closing the door behind me. Privately. His expression shifted immediately to concern. "What happened?" I told him everything. The deer's head, the clean cut, the placement in the stream. How I'd lied to the group about a bear to get them out of there. As I spoke, I watched his face go from concern to grim. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You did the right thing. Getting them out of there safely was the priority." "I know. But Gordon, someone did that on purpose. Someone who knew that stream, knew we bring groups there, and they had the tools and knowledge to do a clean butchering job. Could be some hunter with a grudge," Gordon suggested. "Maybe someone who got turned away from one of our tours, decided to mess with us. Maybe. But it felt like more than just messing with us. It felt like a threat." Gordon leaned back in his chair, thinking, "Do we call the police? And tell them what? There's a rotting deer head 4 miles up the trail? They'll think we're wasting their time, and even if they take it seriously, what can they do? Whoever did it is long gone. So what do you want to do?" I thought about it. "I want to go back up there tomorrow, early, take some photos, document what's there, and I want to avoid that section of trail for a while. Tell the other guides to use the eastern route instead, at least until we know what we're dealing with." Gordon nodded slowly. "All right, but you don't go alone. Take someone with you." And if you see anything else weird, anything at all, we call it in. I went home that evening, but I couldn't settle. My small cabin on the edge of town felt too quiet, too isolated. I kept thinking about that deer's head, sitting in the stream, water flowing around it. Kept thinking about the clean cut, the precision of it. I made dinner but barely ate. Tried to watch television but couldn't focus. Finally, I pulled out my laptop and started researching. Animal mutilations, hunting practices, ritual killings. The internet was full of theories and speculation, most of it nonsense. But buried in the noise, I found some things that made my skin crawl. There were reports from other areas, other states of similar incidents. Not common, but not unheard of either. Animals butchered with unusual precision and left in places where people would find them. Sometimes in streams or rivers, sometimes on trails, sometimes right near campsites. In most cases, the authorities never caught whoever was responsible. The incidents would happen a few times, then stop, then maybe start up again months or years later. Some people thought it was hunters showing off their skills. Others suggested it was people with psychological problems working out their issues on animals. A few even suggested organized groups, though that seemed far-fetched to me. What struck me most was that in several of the cases, the incidents had escalated, started with small animals, rabbits, squirrels, then moved to larger ones, deer, dogs. And in one case in the Pacific Northwest 5 years ago, a hiker had disappeared. They'd found her backpack by a stream 3 days later, but never found her body. That case was still unsolved. I closed the laptop, my hands shaking slightly. I was probably being paranoid. One deer head didn't mean there was some kind of serial killer operating in these mountains. It was most likely just some disturbed individual who'd done something grotesque and would never be seen again. But probably wasn't the same as certainly. And my job was to keep people safe. I tried to get some rest, lying in bed with all the lights in the cabin turned off. But my mind wouldn't stop racing. Every sound outside, the wind in the trees, an animal moving through the brush made me tense. I found myself straining to hear footsteps, to catch the sound of someone approaching. Nobody came. Nothing happened. But I barely slept, and when I finally did drift off near dawn, my dreams were filled with images of sharp blades and blank staring eyes. The next morning I met Gordon and another guide named Phil at the trailhead at 6 a.m. We hiked up to Clearwater Stream in silence, making good time in the cool morning air. The forest was beautiful in the early light, peaceful and serene. It was hard to believe anything bad could happen in a place like this. When we reached the stream, the deer's head was gone. We stood there staring at the empty water. The rocks where it had been wedged were still there, but the head itself had vanished. No sign of it anywhere. No drag marks on the bank. No blood. Nothing. "Are you sure this is the right spot?" Phil asked, though his tone suggested he knew it was. "Positive," I said. "Right there, between those two rocks." Gordon waded into the stream, examining the area closely. "Could an animal have taken it? Bear or mountain lion?" "Possible," I admitted, "but usually they drag it onto the bank to feed, leave some trace. This is clean, too clean." We searched the area for half an hour, looking for any sign of what had happened. We found nothing. Whoever had placed the head there had come back and removed it, covering their tracks completely. As we hiked back down, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that somewhere in the trees someone was observing us, pleased that we'd found their message and understood it, or maybe frustrated that we'd gotten people out before anything worse could happen. Gordon agreed to shift all tours to different trails for the next month. We'd monitor the situation, watch for any other unusual activity. He also contacted the local authorities, gave them a heads up about what we'd found. Though without any physical evidence, there wasn't much they could do. In the weeks that followed, nothing else happened. No more animal remains. No strange signs. Life went back to normal. I kept leading tours, kept taking groups into the mountains, kept teaching them about the wilderness and how to stay safe in it. But I never went back to Clearwater Stream, and I never told anyone the whole truth about what I'd found that day, except Gordon and Phil. The people on that hike still think they were saved from an aggressive bear. They have no idea how close they came to something potentially much worse. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about it, about the precision of that cut. about someone skilled and deliberate enough to leave that message and then remove all evidence, about the fact that they're still out there somewhere, maybe doing the same thing on different trails, in different places. But mostly I think about the 9 people I kept safe that day. I think about how I made the right call, got them out before they saw something that would haunt them, before something worse could happen. In 15 years of guiding, that's always been my job, keeping people safe no matter what. And that's what I did. That's all that really matters in the end. I took the graveyard shift at the Speedway on US 64 in Shiprock because rent doesn't negotiate, and my landlord doesn't accept excuses. It was late November 2022, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, and I was 26 years old with a degree in business management that hadn't opened a single door. The wind that night had teeth, the kind that pushes fine red dust across the parking lot in horizontal sheets and makes the thin corrugated metal around the car wash bay sound like someone shaking a giant piece of tin. The temperature had dropped to 28 degrees by the time my shift started at 10 p.m. Nights at the Speedway follow a rhythm if you can tolerate the isolation. Keep the coffee fresh every 2 hours, rotate the items in the hot case so nothing sits past the health code window, face the shelves so labels point forward, complete 2 safe drops before the armored truck arrives at 6 a.m., and mop the tile floors before 4 so they're dry when the morning shift arrives. My manager, a tired man in his 50s named Glenn, slept at home in Farmington, unless the register jammed or the cooler compressor died. He trusted me with the keys because I showed up on time and didn't steal. My only company that night was a high school senior named Evan, 17 years old, who mopped floors 3 nights a week for gas money and college applications. He was a quiet kid, kept his earbuds in when he worked, never complained. The other regular presence was a black and tan stray dog, some kind of shepherd mix, that survived off whatever it could drag from our dumpster corral behind the building. We didn't feed it directly. Glenn had rules about encouraging animals, but we didn't chase it away either. If you've worked overnight shifts in places like this, you understand how the building settles into patterns. The smell of burnt coffee that never quite leaves the air, the steady hum from the walk-in beer cooler that becomes white noise after the first hour. Long stretches where the highway might as well be abandoned, where you can stand at the front window and watch the white lines disappear into darkness and not see headlights for 30 minutes straight. By 2 a.m., the fuel pumps had been silent for over an hour. The road was empty. The last customer had been a woman in a sedan around 12:40, buying energy drinks and asking for bathroom keys. After that, nothing. I was behind the counter counting bills for the first safe drop, my hands moving through the routine of sorting 20s from 10s, when the door chime sounded. It's a simple pressure sensor built into the hinge, a metal pad that compresses when the door swings open, completing a circuit that triggers a 2-tone electronic chime. There's no other way for that sound to play. Wade has to physically push the door. I looked up from the cash expecting to see a windblown traveler, or someone from one of the tribal housing areas coming in for cigarettes or lottery tickets. The entry area was empty. Both doors we have a double set for the winter wind were completely closed. No gap, no movement in the rubber seals, no draft moving the promotional posters taped to the glass. The air in the store hadn't shifted at all. I could still smell the bitter edge of old coffee and the faint sweetness from the hot case where we kept taquitos and breakfast sandwiches under heat lamps. I came around the counter anyway, my shoes squeaking slightly on the tile, because you check even when you feel foolish for checking. It's part of the job. You develop paranoia about shoplifters and people casing the register for later. I walked down the first aisle, past the chips and cookies, checking the blind spots created by the tall shelving units. Nothing. The second aisle with automotive supplies and phone chargers was equally empty. I was returning to the counter when I noticed the yellow mop bucket near the bathroom hallway. The water inside had ripples. Not the random disturbance from the building settling or the cooler compressor kicking on. These were concentric circles moving outward from the center point in perfect geometry, the way water responds when something passes close enough to disturb the air pressure above its surface. I stopped and watched those ripples expand and fade, each ring taking about 3 seconds to reach the edge of the bucket and disappear against the plastic. That's not caused by a draft. That's not caused by footsteps on a floor with give. That requires something moving past at close range, displacing air with enough volume to create a pressure differential. I stood there feeling my heart beat in my throat until the water went still and glassy again. Then I walked to the front windows, convincing myself someone had pulled into the lot without me hearing over the ambient noise of the coolers and freezers. The parking area was empty except for my car and Evan's old truck. Overhead, the canopy lights created bright pools around each pump island, throwing sharp shadows. That's when I saw the stray dog. The animal was near the dumpster corral at first, doing its usual patrol, head down, moving in that efficient trot dogs use when they're working. Then as I watched, it froze. Every muscle locked, the posture change was instant and complete. Its hackles rose in a line from shoulders to tail, making its silhouette twice the normal width. It stared at something near the front entrance, something I couldn't see from my angle inside, and began taking slow, stiff steps backward, not running, not turning away, moving in reverse while maintaining eye contact with whatever held its attention. I've seen dogs react to threats before, aggressive posturing, barking, the decision to fight or flee. This was different. This was the hardwired response that lives deeper than training. The thing that kept dogs alive for thousands of years before humans put them in houses. The dog continued its backward walk, legs rigid, until it reached the edge of the light pool. Then it turned and bolted into the darkness beyond the property fence, becoming invisible in seconds. My hands were cold. I realized I'd been holding my breath. The clock above the register showed 2:14 a.m. I was about to call Evan from the back stockroom when I saw the figure. It was standing under the canopy at Pump 8, positioned exactly where a person would stand when fueling a vehicle. But there was no vehicle. No car, no truck, no motorcycle. Just that shape holding position in the bright circle of overhead light. The proportions were wrong. Too tall. Perhaps 7 feet. Maybe more. Too narrow through the shoulders for that height. As if someone were standing with their arms pressed tight to their sides and their shoulder blades pulled up and forward. Wind pushed a sheet of red dust through the rectangle of light, swirling around the pump island and the concrete pad. The figure didn't react to the wind, didn't shift weight or adjust its stance, just stood there, static, in a place where people usually hold nozzles and watch the digital counter climb. I took one step toward the door and stopped. The glass gave me a clean sight line. No headlights approached from either direction on the highway. No engine sounds penetrated the building, just that shape and the wind, and my own breathing getting shallow. "You want me to lock it?" Evan asked from somewhere behind me. He'd emerged from the stockroom carrying a box of napkins for the hot case dispenser. He meant the interior deadbolt on the right-hand door, a secondary lock we sometimes engaged when someone lingered too long outside or acted erratically. "Not yet," I said, surprised my voice sounded level. "Finish the mop work in front so we're not slipping on wet tile if we need to move quickly." The shape wasn't at Pump 8 when I looked again. It was at the ice freezer along the front wall, the big chest unit where we kept bagged ice for customers. No transition that I saw, no walking motion between the 2 points. Just there, at the freezer, one moment absent and the next moment present. The heavy lid lifted an inch on its hinges. White fog spilled out, not billowing like steam, but flowing like something denser than air, pouring over the edge and spreading across the concrete in a thin layer before dissipating. The fog had that particular quality that only comes from commercial freezer air, sharp with cold and slightly chemical from the refrigerant. The lid came back down with a soft contact, the rubber seal compressing quietly, not the hard clack it makes when customers let it drop from full height, but controlled as if someone had guided it closed with both hands. I made myself breathe slowly, pulling air in through my nose and out through my mouth. The way I'd learned in a first aid class years ago when they taught us about controlling panic. I told myself eyes make mistakes in low light. I told myself glass creates reflections and distortions, especially at night when interior and exterior lighting create competing sources. I moved 2 steps left to eliminate the glare from the hot case, and looked again at my new angle. The freezer lid was closed. The area around Pump 8 was empty. Nothing moved outside except dust in the wind. What disturbed me next wasn't an object moving through space. It was the way one section of the window changed character. We have a long run of plate glass windows across the front, broken into individual panes by vertical metal mullions. At 2:29 a.m., I checked the register clock. A rectangular section of glass went dark at the top third, the way it does when someone stands inches away on the opposite side and blocks the exterior lights. There was no face visible, no features I could identify, just a vertical section of deeper darkness at the wrong height, held stationary like someone lining up their position with the register. I took 2 steps backward until the candy rack provided cover to waist height. When you've been robbed once, and I was robbed at a different job 3 years ago, a man with a knife who took $400 and left me shaking in the back office, you remember distances, you remember sight lines and exit paths. The front mat to the counter measures about 15 feet. The counter to the bathroom hallway is 10 feet. The office door is behind the counter, always unlocked until 3 a.m. when I do the second safe drop. "Lock it," I said to Evan. I heard the small metallic click as he engaged the interior deadbolt on the right-hand door. Immediately, the handle jiggled half an inch. Testing. Then the entire door pressed inward against the latch, not with impact force but with steady, increasing pressure. The kind you feel with your palm against glass when a strong person leans their weight from the other side. The rubber weather stripping around the frame made a long, dragging squeal. The metal handle produced a dry squeak of stressed components. I put my hand flat against the glass to gauge the force. You can feel load transfer through laminated glass if you pay attention. The door eased back slightly, releasing pressure. Then it pushed again, testing whether sustained force would overcome the lock mechanism. We have an intercom button at the register, originally installed so staff could communicate with customers at the fuel pumps without opening the door during winter. I hit that button without thinking, acting on some instinct I didn't examine. Static crackled through the small speaker mounted near my left ear, the white noise of an open channel. Then I heard a breath. Not a word, not a vocalization, just one long drawn inhalation, the sound of air moving through a throat and into lungs. The breath held for perhaps 2 seconds. Then the channel cut to silence. I released the button. My finger left a damp print on the plastic. I didn't press it again. I had no desire to invite further communication, no desire to establish dialogue with whatever stood on the other side of that glass. I called to Evan, keeping my voice low but clear, and told him to bring the mop bucket behind the counter while I checked the back door. He rolled the bucket toward me, and it clacked heavily over the floor drain, water sloshing against the plastic sides and nearly spilling. I retrieved the steel bar we used to secure the back door during delivery hours. A heavy piece of solid metal about 4 feet long that dropped into mounting brackets and couldn't be lifted from outside. I set it on the floor within reach by my feet. I didn't want to be the person who left that bar in the office because carrying it seemed paranoid. The scraping started at 2:48 a.m. If you've worked a loading dock, you know the sounds. You know wooden pallets sliding against concrete. You know hand trucks rattling over uneven surfaces. You know the distinctive slap of shrink-wrap plastic catching wind. This was different. This was metal on metal, a thin edge being dragged deliberately across the galvanized steel of the roll-up delivery door. Slow and regular, like someone working a hook or blade along the corrugations, tracing each horizontal ridge from left to right. Then the pattern changed to vertical. A hand-over-hand rhythm moving up the door, the sound of weight settling on each corrugated rib. If you've heard someone climb a rolling door, usually kids messing around, sometimes copper thieves checking for access, you recognize that specific noise. The dock light above the door, a sodium vapor fixture controlled by a photocell, dimmed to half intensity when whatever was climbing reached that elevation. Not flickering, not going out, just dropping to partial output, as if something large had positioned itself between the bulb and the sensor. The light returned to full brightness when the weight moved. The photocell clicked audibly. The weight climbed higher. The light dropped again. The pattern repeated. Up, down, not fast, not frantic, taking time. I slid the steel bar into the mounting brackets on the back door and pushed until the ends bit firmly into the frame slots. We weren't going out that way. The plan crystallized in my head. Hold the front, maintain sightlines to all entry points, make noise if it tried the glass, and wait for sunrise. I killed half the interior lights to reduce reflections on the glass and improve my ability to see outside. I left the hot case illuminated and the register lights on so we could see our hands in the cash drawer if needed. When I returned to the front counter, there was a mark on the outside of the walk-in beer cooler door. The cooler entrance is glass-fronted like most modern convenience store installations, allowing customers to grab beer without staff assistance. The smear was high on the glass, higher than I could reach without standing on something. It looked like someone had dragged an oily palm across the surface, leaving a streak of residue that thinned toward the trailing edge. The smear caught the light from the interior cooler fixtures, showing texture, whorls and friction ridges that suggested a handprint, but elongated, stretched as if the hand had been larger than normal or moving while pressed against the glass. "Do we call the police?" Evan asked. He'd set the mop handle down so he could keep both hands on the counter edge. His knuckles were white. "If I call dispatch and report someone outside but I can't describe a face, can't describe a vehicle, can't provide a concrete threat, they'll tell us to lock up and wait," I said. "If it tries to force entry, I call. Until then, we watch." Evan nodded. We stood like that for what felt like much longer than the clock indicated. The windows were clean enough to provide clear views of the entire parking area. The tall shape moved along the glass panes in sequence. It would position itself at one window section until the dark vertical strip it created aligned with the metal mullions, then slide laterally to the next section. There was nothing theatrical in the movement. No banging on the glass to create fear. No breathing that fogged the surface. Just a body blocking light in places a body shouldn't be, moving with the patience of something that had all night to work. The stray dog had solved part of the puzzle for me earlier, I realized. I saw a flicker of movement in the car wash bay to the right side of the building. The dog had forced itself into the far inside corner where cinder block met cinder block, nose jammed into the seam at the joint, body compressed into the smallest possible profile. I called softly to it, a clicking sound I'd used before when leaving food. The dog didn't respond, didn't rotate an ear toward my voice, didn't adjust its position. It held that corner with complete fixation, as if the 90-degree angle of the walls represented the only geometry left in the world that made sense. That's how animals respond when the mathematics of their environment have stopped adding up correctly. At 3:30 a.m., the figure was standing in the mouth of the car wash bay. It filled the opening, the way a person would fill a doorframe if that person were far too tall for standard construction. Then it bent. Not a casual tilt of the head, not a slouching of shoulders. It folded at the waist until whatever served as its head aligned exactly with my eye level behind the register. There was approximately 40 feet of glass and concrete and open air between us, but it had calculated the geometry precisely. I could feel that precision in my chest, like recognizing a mathematical proof. It was showing me that it understood sight lines, that it understood me. The figure held that bent position for a duration that made my forearms tingle with the sensation you get when blood flow is restricted. Evan spoke quietly beside me. "Don't move." He didn't elaborate, didn't ask questions, just those two words delivered with the certainty of instinct. I picked up the steel bar from the floor, gripped it with both hands, raised it chest high, and brought it down hard onto the cast iron drain grate set into the tile floor along the counterfront. The sound was massive, metal on metal, a ringing collision that carried into every aisle, penetrated the stockroom, probably reached the highway. I did it again, 3 times total, each impact deliberate and loud, announcing presence, announcing the capacity for violence. The shape didn't startle, didn't flinch or recoil. It straightened in a single smooth motion, not in stages, not like a person unbending, but as if someone had pulled a string and returned it to vertical. In that same moment, it was farther from the bay opening than a single step should carry anything. Not teleportation, not magic. Just movement that covered more distance than the motion should allow. Physics bent slightly and then snapped back. Another held moment, the figure now standing in open space between the bay and the fuel pumps. Then nothing. Empty space where it had been, gone from view but not forgotten. We watched the windows and saw nothing for a long time. We didn't investigate, didn't open doors to search. We stayed positioned where we could lock ourselves in the office if the front glass failed, and reach the back hallway if the front entry became blocked. Every 8 to 10 minutes, the right-hand door took a small pull from outside. The same testing pressure on the deadbolt, hands finding the mechanism through the glass, checking for play in the hardware. The handle squeaked. The seal around the frame made that long, dragging protest again. Then it stopped. Minutes of silence. Then the test repeated. Same force, same duration, same patient methodology. Not increasing, not trying to break through, just checking, over and over, whether the door had weakened. At 5:47 a.m., the sky began to lighten at the far eastern end of the highway, the darkness turning to dark blue. At 6:02, a diesel engine rattled onto the property. A sound so normal I almost didn't believe it. A man in an old pickup climbed out carrying a thermos, moving stiffly in the cold. He was perhaps 60 years old, wearing work coveralls and a knit cap. I watched something I hadn't expected to witness, how the parking lot wrapped itself around a normal person, when someone moves the way a human should move. When their proportions match expectation and their gait follows normal biomechanics, the environment returns to the shapes you know. Angles become familiar again. Distances make sense. He paid for coffee with exact change. Told me the wind had dried his eyes out something terrible and left. His truck pulled back onto the highway and disappeared toward Farmington. The dog was no longer in the car wash bay. I walked carefully to where I could see that back corner, moving slowly in case it was still there, and frightened. Nothing. I tried a soft call, the same clicking sound. No response, no movement anywhere in the bay. Glenn pulled into the lot at 7:12 a.m., parking his sedan in his usual spot. He looked exhausted, the way he always looks during the last week of any month when inventory and scheduling overlap. I told him everything while he walked the perimeter of the building, checking locks and examining the areas I'd described. He crouched at the back delivery door and put his index finger along two long scratches cut into the paint below the latch. The lines were parallel, separated by about 3 inches, running horizontal for perhaps 8 inches each. They were clean and deliberate, not the random scraping of wind-blown debris. He stood and examined the area higher up on the metal door. About a foot above my maximum reach, even if I stretched on my toes, a greasy smear had dried on the surface. It wasn't a fingerprint you could read like forensic evidence. It was a stretched hand shape suggesting something larger than normal. Someone taller than the customers we served between midnight and dawn. Glenn didn't laugh. Didn't tell me I was seeing things or suggest I'd been awake too long. He's not that kind of man. Next time, he said, call Navajo Police Department. Tell them you think it's a skinwalker. They'll know what to do. He said it the same way he'd discuss a gas leak or livestock on the highway, matter-of-fact, procedural, part of the job. He told me I could transfer to day shifts if I wanted them. I said yes before he finished the sentence. I came back that afternoon for my next shift, my last night shift, though I didn't know it yet. I called for the dog twice, standing outside near the dumpster corral where it used to patrol. I left an old hot dog from the roller grill on the step near the back door and checked it at closing. It had shriveled in the dry air. No one had eaten it. There are parts of that night I replay while counting change in daylight hours, when the store is full of normal people buying normal things. The door pushing back with furniture moving pressure. The climb on the corrugated metal, weight settling on each rib like slow pull-ups. The way the dock light dimmed at a specific height and returned when the weight descended. But the thing I think about most is the bend in the car wash bay. I work around human bodies every day. I know how joints hinge, how spines flex, how people move through space. Whatever that was folded itself to match my eye level like it was solving an engineering problem, meeting a specification. It did it without hurry, without threat display, without any visible effort. I didn't tell my parents, didn't tell my girlfriend, didn't tell friends I'd grown up with. I don't like the look people give you after stories like this, the careful neutrality that means they think you're lying or crazy. I wrote this account to establish a clear line between what I might have imagined and what physically happened. That line is simple and clean. Wind pushed dust across the lot. The door chime activated with no one in the doorway. The mop bucket rippled like something displaced the air. The stray dog responded the way animals respond when the environment stops making sense. Something tall stood where only vehicles should be, and tested our door with the systematic patience of someone who understood hardware. I made noise with the only defensive tool I had, and it was sufficient to carry me to sunrise. That's all I have. That, and 2 parallel scratches below a latch, and a smear higher than I can reach, and the memory of something bending itself to meet my eyes across 40 feet of concrete. I took the day shift. The dog never came back. That's the complete and accurate account of November 17th, 2022, at the Speedway on US 64 in Shiprock, New Mexico. I was 26 years old. I was sober. I was afraid, and I'm glad I never have to work that shift again. My name is Jared Thompson, and this all happened back in 2017 when I was living off the grid about a dozen miles south of Fort Kent, Maine, tucked in a damp patch of forest where the pines pressed so tight against my cabin that it sometimes felt like I'd built the place inside a green coffin. But I liked it that way. No neighbors, no traffic, just me and some squirrels with questionable moral fiber. I'd come out here to escape the debts and the dull ache of a desk job I'd held in a cramped office outside Boston, where I'd once thought my biggest challenge in life would be learning how to like decaf. But I wasn't bitter. In fact, I was proud of what I'd done. I'd quit that job, taken my savings, and hauled a truckload of cheap lumber to carve out my own little home on a plot I'd bought on a whim. At 38, I wanted simplicity. The world delivered something else entirely. It was early September. The mosquitoes had thinned out, and the ground still held a bit of summer warmth. I remember sitting outside with my coffee, instant, tasted like dirt, but it was warm, and watching the sunrise through a gap in the branches. I'd fixed a loose board in my roof the day before, so I felt confident my shack wouldn't turn into a pool once the fall rains hit. I tried to keep a routine. Up early, gather kindling, boil water, check traps for rabbits. The quiet, that's what I loved. But that morning I saw something that set the tone for all that followed. While I was washing my face at the creek, I noticed footprints near the bank. Boots, heavy tread, maybe 2 people. I knew I never had visitors, and as far as I was aware, there were no trails nearby. No reason for anyone to pass through. The soil was soft, and the prints looked fresh. I remember feeling uneasy, but I shrugged. Probably hunters scouting deer, I thought. This was Maine. People passed through at odd hours. I tried not to worry. But as I followed the prints along the bank, I noticed something strange about them. They circled back toward my cabin, lingering near the windows. One set stood in place for a long time, just outside my bedroom window. The mud packed down from someone standing there, watching. How long had they been there? While I slept. I hurried back to my cabin, my shirt still dripping creek water, and checked the locks on my windows. Most were just simple latches. I'd never worried about security out here. I grabbed my hunting knife and checked every corner of my small home, even looking under my cot. Nothing disturbed. Over the next few days, though, the unease settled in deeper. I found a cigarette butt behind my woodshed. I don't smoke. A small branch snapped near my cabin's back window one night, right after I doused the lantern. I sat there, heart pumping, holding a hatchet, squinting in the dark. Nothing. Then I discovered a torn scrap of fabric caught on a nail by my doorframe. Gray cloth, thick cotton, like from a heavy shirt. I hadn't torn anything. It felt like someone was watching me, maybe testing me. I made jokes to myself to stay calm. Guess I got secret admirers, I said under my breath. Next time bring pie. But the truth was, I didn't like it. One night I woke to the sound of breathing outside my window. Not animal breathing, human, slow and deliberate. I lay frozen in my bed, afraid to move. The breathing continued for what felt like hours. Then footsteps slowly circled my cabin before fading into the trees. I began sleeping with my rifle by my side. On the 5th day, I hiked farther upstream to check if my old neighbor Randy, neighbor meaning a guy who lived 3 miles away, had seen anyone. Randy was a wiry man in his late 50s who'd lost 2 toes to frostbite one winter. He prided himself on spotting anything that moved. The forest felt different that day. The birds were quiet. The air hung heavy with moisture, yet nothing moved in the underbrush. As I approached Randy's cabin, I called out his name. No answer. The front door stood slightly ajar, which wasn't like Randy. He was cautious by nature, always talking about keeping the forest critters out of his supplies. I didn't find him at home, but I found something else behind his cabin. Randy himself sprawled in a patch of ferns, his throat open, blood dried into a black crust on the moss. I fell backward so hard I nearly crushed my tailbone. I didn't touch him. I didn't have to. He was stiff, gone for at least a day. Flies buzzed around his face. Randy had no enemies I knew of. He mostly sold small carvings and gathered wild mushrooms to trade at a distant market. I felt my chest tighten. Someone had done this, and whoever it was might be watching me right now. I remember whispering, "Jesus, Randy," as if the poor guy might answer. Then I looked around and saw another body, maybe 20 feet away. A younger man I didn't know, wearing a faded green jacket and jeans, also dead. It looked like he'd been beaten. His skull had a dent, and he was curled on his side, mouth open, eyes frozen, as if his final thought had been disbelief. 2 dead men. No signs of a struggle besides the scattered leaves. I heard a branch crack in the distance and froze. My hands shook. I ducked low and backed away, trying not to rustle the ferns. Whatever had happened here, I didn't want to be next. As I crept away, I noticed details I wished I hadn't. Randy's fingernails were broken and caked with blood. He'd fought back. The stranger's boots matched the prints I'd found by my creek. And most disturbing, Randy's cabin had been thoroughly searched, drawers emptied onto the floor, mattress slashed open. They were looking for something. The crack of another branch closer this time sent me into a panicked retreat. I no longer cared about stealth. I crashed through the underbrush, following the rough trail back toward my own cabin. The entire way, I felt eyes on my back. Twice I spun around, certain someone was right behind me, but saw only trees and shadows. I made it to my cabin before dark. I paced inside, swore a dozen times and wished I had a phone. But I had no cell signal out here, and the closest payphone was too far. I lit my kerosene lamp and tried to think. If I hiked back to town, that'd be a full day's trek. I could try in the morning. For now, I had to stay put. I shut my shutters, barred the door with a beam of wood. I had my hunting rifle, an old 30-30 lever action, and a dull revolver inherited from an uncle. The revolver had misfired once, and I never trusted it, but now I cherished it like a friend. Night fell quiet. Too quiet. I sat in a chair, rifle across my lap, listening to my own breathing. I heard distant footsteps, a brief muffled laugh, then silence. Minutes crawled by. My throat felt dry. I decided to move my small table to block the door, just in case. The wind picked up, rattling the loose window pane. I forced myself to eat some crackers, but they tasted like sawdust. Every sound outside made me flinch. An owl's call, the rustle of leaves, the creaking of branches. I kept seeing Randy's open throat, the flies circling his fixed eyes, and I kept thinking, why? What could Randy have had that someone would kill for? As far as I knew, Randy lived as simply as I did. He had no valuables, no secret stash of cash or drugs, just his carvings, his mushroom knowledge, and his quiet life in the woods. Eventually, exhaustion overtook my fear. I dozed off, still clutching my rifle, only to jerk awake at the distant sound of voices. Men talking, far enough away that I couldn't make out words, but close enough to know they were near my property. I extinguished my lamp and peered through a crack in the shutters. Moonlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across my clearing. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then, movement caught my eye. Two figures emerged from the tree line, moving with deliberate steps toward my cabin. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I woke to footsteps on my porch. I jumped up, heart hammering, and pressed my eye to the small gap in the shutter. Two men stood outside. I couldn't see their faces clearly in the moonlight, but I caught a glimpse of one's profile when he turned to whisper something. They were tall, lean, dressed in layered clothing, dark flannel shirts under cheap windbreakers. One had a thick black beard and a shaved head. The other wore a knit cap and had a mustache so thin it looked like a pencil line. They carried knives and a short axe. The bearded one tapped on my door with the back of his hand. A quiet, taunting knock. I held my breath. He spoke softly. "We know you're in there. Let's not make this messy." His voice had a slight rasp to it. Calm, chilling. They sounded almost casual, as if asking me to share a pot of coffee. I clenched my rifle so hard my knuckles hurt. I made no sound. The mustached one tried the doorknob and gave it a shove. "Come on," he said, voice low. "We're not leaving empty-handed." Empty-handed? I had nothing of value. Just some canned beans, a rifle, a few personal tools. What did they want? The bearded man's tone grew annoyed. "You killed time on that old guy. Why not finish up here?" My stomach dropped. They were killers. They butchered Randy. They didn't care who I was. Maybe they were smugglers crossing from Canada, robbing off-grid folks who couldn't report them. Or maybe just deranged drifters who'd chosen this stretch of woods for their sick games. They circled my cabin. The mustached one tried to pry open a shutter. I moved quietly to that window and shoved my rifle barrel through the narrow gap, not firing, just showing it. He pulled back with a startled grunt and cursed softly. They backed away a few steps. I heard them mutter something about shooting him later, and I realized that if I stayed locked in, I'd be trapped. They could starve me out, set my cabin on fire, force me into the open. I had to act. I remembered my truck parked about 30 yards behind the cabin. It was an old pickup with a half tank of gas. If I could get there and drive toward town, I might escape. but the key was on my table. They were out there, waiting. I needed a distraction. I had a propane lantern and a spare can of fuel under my cot. I hatched a clumsy plan. Toss the can out front, hope it distracts them, then slip out the back window and sprint to the truck. Not brilliant, but I didn't have many options. I moved slowly, careful not to knock anything over. My cabin's back window was small, but I could squeeze through. The two men were talking outside, their voices low. The bearded one said, "We should have killed him when he was at the stream." So they'd been following me. I forced myself not to panic. The floor creaked beneath my foot, and their conversation stopped abruptly. "He's moving around in there," the mustached one said. "Let him," replied the bearded one. "We've got all night." I heard one of them walk around to the back of my cabin right where I'd planned to escape. My mind raced. I needed a new plan. I noticed my kerosene lamp on the table. It was nearly full. I grabbed it, unscrewed the cap, and poured some of the fuel onto a rag. I stuffed the soaked rag into a tin can, leaving a bit hanging out as a wick. I opened the front window a crack, lit the rag with a match, and tossed the makeshift firebomb as far as I could toward the trees opposite my truck. It landed with a dull thud and burst into flames, igniting the dry pine needles around it. "Fire!" one of them shouted. I heard their boots pounding as they ran toward the flames. I opened the back window as quietly as I could. The night air smelled of damp earth and now smoke. I grabbed my propane can, crawled halfway out, and tossed it with a dull thump onto the far side of the clearing, hoping they'd go check. I heard them hush. Then I lobbed a stone in another direction to create confusion. One of them said, "What the hell was that?" I seized the moment, slipped through the window, and crouched behind a stump. My heart pounded so loud I feared they could track me by sound alone. I crept around the side of the cabin. Their footsteps moved away for a moment. I risked a glance. They were about 20 feet off, searching the darkness. I bolted for the truck, staying low, trying not to breathe. My foot caught on a root, and I stumbled, crashing onto my knees. The noise drew their attention. "He's here," yelled the mustached one. They ran toward me. I scrambled up, fumbled for my keys in my pocket. I reached the truck, yanked the door, jumped in. The interior smelled of stale coffee and old pine needles. I shoved the key in the ignition, praying it would start. The engine coughed but started. Headlights cut through the trees. One of the men hurled something, maybe the axe, at my windshield. It cracked but didn't shatter. I slammed the gas. The truck lurched forward. They yelled. I caught a glimpse of the mustached one in the beam. He wore dirty jeans and had a long scar running down his left forearm. He rushed at me, knife raised. I swerved. The truck clipped him. He dropped out of view. I didn't want to kill anyone, but these men had murdered Randy and that other poor soul. They were going to kill me. My hands shook on the wheel. As I sped into the night, I saw in the rearview mirror that the bearded man chased me a few steps, then stopped. The mustached one lay still on the ground. I wasn't proud, but I was alive. Branches scraped the sides of the truck as I veered down the narrow track, heading toward the main road. I didn't know if they had a vehicle or would follow me. I focused on reaching town. My headlights bounced wildly over the rutted path. The night pressed in on all sides. The darkness between the trees absolute. I kept expecting to see the bearded man step into the road, or worse, for the mustached one to somehow appear in my rearview mirror, rising from the truck bed behind me. Every bump and pothole jarred my bones. The cracked windshield created strange patterns from the moonlight, making shadows dance across my dashboard. I gripped the wheel so tight my fingers cramped. After about 15 minutes of driving, the narrow path widened slightly. I was approaching the logging road that would eventually lead to the highway. My breathing slowed a bit. Maybe I'd make it. Then my headlights caught something in the road ahead, a fallen tree blocking the path. It hadn't been there earlier that week when I'd last driven into town for supplies. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a stop just feet from the massive pine. This was no accident. The cut at the base was fresh, the sawdust still bright on the dark bark. They'd planned this. How many of them were there? I threw the truck into reverse, but as I looked back, my blood froze. There, illuminated in my taillights, stood the bearded man. Somehow he'd gotten ahead of me, Or there was a third man I hadn't seen. He held something in his hand, a pistol, aimed directly at me. I ducked as the window behind me shattered. Glass rained down on my neck and shoulders. I floored the accelerator, the truck lurching backward. The man dove to the side. I spun the wheel, trying to turn around on the narrow road. The truck's tires caught on the soft shoulder, and for a heart-stopping moment I thought I'd get stuck. The engine roared as the wheels spun, then caught. I crashed through the underbrush, no longer following any path, just desperately trying to put distance between myself and the man with the gun. Branches whipped against the truck, scraping paint and denting metal. I had no idea where I was going. The forest floor was uneven, tossing me around the cabin like a rag doll. I could taste blood where I'd bitten my lip. I drove blindly for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Eventually, I broke through onto another narrow trail. Not the main road, but something that might lead there. I slowed, trying to get my bearings, listening for sounds of pursuit. The forest was quiet again, too quiet. No bird calls, no rustling leaves, just the ping of my truck's cooling engine and my own ragged breathing. I checked my fuel gauge. Half a tank still. Enough to reach town if I could find the main road. I shifted into drive and continued forward. More cautiously now. Every shadow made me flinch. Every sound tightened my grip on the wheel. The trail eventually widened, the trees thinning slightly. I recognized where I was. A fire road that ran parallel to the highway, about 3 miles east of where I should have emerged. I'd driven in a wide arc through the forest, but I was heading in the right direction. Dawn was still hours away, but the night seemed less oppressive now. I allowed myself a small breath of relief. Maybe I'd escaped them. Maybe I was safe. Then my headlights caught a glint of metal ahead. A vehicle was parked across the fire road. An old Jeep with mud-splattered sides. 2 men stood beside it. One looked up as my lights hit him. It was the mustached man I thought I'd hit. Alive, his face streaked with dirt and blood, but very much alive. My stomach dropped. How had he gotten here? I'd felt the impact, seen him fall. The other man wasn't the bearded one. This was someone new, shorter and stockier, wearing a hunting vest. I had seconds to decide. I could reverse again, try to find another way out. I could abandon the truck and flee into the woods on foot, or I could do something they wouldn't expect. I slammed the gas pedal to the floor. The truck surged forward, engine screaming. The men's eyes widened. They scrambled to get out of the way. I aimed straight for their Jeep. Metal crunched against metal as my truck slammed into the smaller vehicle, shoving it sideways. Sparks flew from the undercarriage as it scraped across the gravel road. My seatbelt locked, nearly strangling me as I jolted forward. The airbag didn't deploy too old of a model, and my forehead smacked the steering wheel. Stars swam in my vision, but I'd cleared a path. The Jeep now sat at an angle, leaving just enough room for my truck to squeeze past. I gunned the engine again, scraping my passenger side against their vehicle as I pushed through. A shot rang out. My side mirror shattered. Another bullet punched through my tailgate as I accelerated away. By dawn, I pulled onto a paved road and kept driving until I reached a gas station on the outskirts of Fort Kent. I stumbled inside, pale and dusty. I told the clerk there'd been a killing. He stared at me, then reached for the phone. The police arrived in a rush, asked a dozen questions. My truck was a mess. Cracked windshield, bullet holes in the tailgate, passenger side scraped raw and blood. Mine from a cut on my forehead, smeared on the steering wheel. I led them back later that day. We found Randy's body and the other victim's corpse still there. The mustached man I'd clipped was gone, but there was a dark stain in the leaves. The bearded man, too, was nowhere to be found. As we approached my cabin, I half expected to find it burned to the ground, but it stood untouched. Door still barred from the inside. My makeshift firebomb having burned itself out without spreading to the surrounding forest. Inside, nothing was disturbed. It was as if the night before had been a nightmare, except for the open back window and the blood from my scraped knees dotting the floor. The authorities took my statement, collected evidence, and promised to search the woods. I never saw those men again, and I never went back to that cabin. The following week I sold the place cheap and returned to a safer life. The police said they'd keep an eye out. I nodded, knowing the forest was big and secrets were easy to bury. They never found the men. The investigation turned up few leads. The younger victim was identified as a hiker from New Hampshire who'd been reported missing a month earlier. They found the Jeep abandoned 10 miles north, wiped clean of prints. The Border Patrol increased surveillance, suspecting drug runners or human traffickers. I moved back to Boston, took a job I hated, and tried to forget. But some nights, I still wake in a cold sweat, certain I hear footsteps outside my apartment door. I've installed 3 locks and keep a baseball bat by my bed. I never learned what those men were looking for. Maybe Randy had stumbled upon something he shouldn't have. A smuggling route, a stash, a secret. Maybe they were just killers who enjoyed the hunt. The not knowing haunts me more than the memories. Sometimes I think of Randy's quiet smile, and the way he used to whittle tiny owls out of pine scraps. That's what I remember most, standing there among the trees, hoping that the world would make sense again. It never did. I still have nightmares about the bearded man's voice. We should have killed him when he was at the stream. So casual, so certain, like he'd done it 100 times before, like he might do it again. I wonder how many other cabins they've visited, how many other bodies lie undiscovered in those vast silent woods. And sometimes when I hear a branch snap outside my window at night, I wonder if they're still looking for me. My name is James Jones, and I am 63 years old. This is the story of what happened to me on August 14th, 1998, and the days that followed. It's a tale that still haunts me to this day, one that changed my life and the lives of everyone in our small town forever. I was a search and rescue officer in a small town in Maine, not far from the Canadian border. Millbrook, as we called it, was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and nothing much happened. It was a town of barely 2,000 souls, nestled between dense forests and rugged mountains. The kind of place where you could leave your doors unlocked at night and not think twice about it. I'd lived in Millbrook all my life. Born and raised here. I'd seen the town change over the decades, but not by much. We got a new stoplight at the intersection of Main and Elm in '85, and the old Miller's General Store became a Walmart in '92, much to the chagrin of the older folks. But other than that, Millbrook remained largely untouched by time. I took to my job as a search and rescue officer with a dedication that some might call obsessive. In a town where the most exciting thing that happened was Mrs. Johnson's cat getting stuck up a tree, I suppose I needed something to pour my energy into, and let me tell you, nothing could have prepared me for that summer. August 14th, 1998, started like any other day. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., just as the first rays of sunlight were beginning to peek over the mountains. My wife Sarah was still asleep. We'd been married for 35 years, and she was used to my early mornings by now. I kissed her softly on the forehead before heading downstairs. The house was quiet, save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirping of birds outside. I made myself a quick breakfast, 2 eggs over easy and a slice of toast, and washed it down with a cup of strong black coffee. As I ate, I glanced out the kitchen window at the forest that bordered our property. The trees stood tall and dark, their branches swaying gently in the morning breeze. Little did I know that those same trees would soon become the setting for a nightmare. I arrived at the station just before 7 a.m. Our team was small, just me and my buddy Tom, with a couple of volunteers we could call on if needed. Tom was already there, his feet propped up on the desk, a half-eaten donut in one hand and the morning paper in the other. "Morning, James," he said, not looking up from his paper. "Anything exciting happen on your way in? Maybe a squirrel crossed the road?" I chuckled, pouring myself another cup of coffee. This one was stale, having sat in the pot since yesterday afternoon, but I didn't mind. "Not today, Tom, but who knows? Maybe we'll get lucky and have to rescue old Mrs. Johnson's cat again." Tom laughed, finally putting down his paper. "God, I hope not. That beast nearly took my eye out last time." We settled into our usual routine, checking equipment, going over maps of the area, and discussing any potential trouble spots. The summer had been unusually dry, and we were worried about the risk of forest fires. Little did we know that fire would be the least of our worries. It was around 10 a.m. when the call came in. I remember it clearly because I was in the middle of telling Tom about the new fishing lure I'd bought, convinced it was going to help me finally catch that monster trout in Henderson Lake. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through our conversation. Tom answered it, his expression quickly changing from bored to concerned. "Slow down, ma'am," he said, reaching for a pen and paper. "What's your name?" "Okay, Mrs. Miller. Now, tell me what happened." I watched as Tom jotted down notes, his brow furrowing deeper with each passing moment. When he hung up, he looked at me with a grim expression. "We've got a missing hiker," he said, pushing the paper towards me. "Claire Miller. Went out for a hike yesterday morning and hasn't returned. Her husband Hank is frantic." I felt a twinge of concern. In all my years as a search and rescue officer, we'd had our fair share of missing hikers. Most of the time, they'd simply gotten turned around, or maybe twisted an ankle and needed help getting back. But something about Tom's expression told me this was different. "Did she leave a trail plan?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Most locals didn't bother with such formalities, believing they knew the area well enough. Tom shook his head. "Nope. Hank says she's done this hike a dozen times. Knows the area like the back of her hand." I sighed, reaching for my gear. "All right, let's head out. We'll meet Hank at the trailhead and get more details." As we drove to the trailhead in our old Jeep Cherokee, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the unusually still air, or the way the shadows seemed to linger beneath the trees. Whatever it was, it set my nerves on edge. We arrived at the Blackwater Trail parking lot about 20 minutes later. Hank Miller was already there, pacing back and forth next to his pickup truck. He was a wiry guy with a thick beard, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. As soon as we pulled up, Hank rushed over, his eyes wild with worry. "You've got to find her," he said, his voice cracking. "Claire's never been gone this long. Something must have happened." I put a hand on his shoulder, trying to calm him down. "We'll find her, Hank. But first we need you to tell us everything you can about when you last saw Claire, and what she was wearing." Hank took a deep breath, running a hand through his beard. "She left yesterday morning, around 8 a.m., said she was going to do the Blackwater Loop, like she's done 100 times before. She was wearing hiking boots, jeans, a blue t-shirt, and a red scarf. She had a small backpack with water and some snacks." Tom jotted down the details while I studied the trailhead map. The Blackwater Loop was a popular hiking trail, about 10 miles long. It led up through dense forest, along the edge of a steep ridge, and then back down to the parking lot. Under normal circumstances, it would take an experienced hiker like Claire about 5 to 6 hours to complete. "When did you realize something was wrong?" I asked Hank. He shook his head, his eyes filling with tears. "She said she'd be back by dinner. When she wasn't home by 8 p.m., I started to worry. I drove out here, but her car was still in the lot. I hiked a bit of the trail, calling her name, but it was getting dark. I should have called you guys sooner. I thought maybe she'd just lost track of time, you know?" I nodded, understanding his hesitation. In a small town like ours, people often tried to handle things on their own before calling for help. But now, Claire had been missing for over 24 hours, and every minute counted. "All right, Hank," I said, grabbing my pack from the Jeep. "Tom and I are going to head out now. We've called in a couple of volunteers to help with the search. I need you to stay here at the trailhead. If Claire makes it back on her own, I want you to be here to meet her. Can you do that?" Hank nodded, though I could see he wanted to come with us. "Yeah, I can do that. Just find her, okay?" I promised we would, but as Tom and I set out on the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that this search was going to be anything but routine. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees casting long shadows across the path. And somewhere in those woods, Claire Miller was waiting to be found. Little did I know that this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would change our town forever. The Blackwater Trail started innocently enough. The first mile or so was well maintained, with clear markers and even a few benches for hikers to rest. But as Tom and I pushed deeper into the forest, the trail became rougher, the undergrowth thicker. We called out Claire's name every few minutes, our voices echoing through the trees. But the only response was the occasional chirp of a bird, or the rustle of leaves in the breeze. "You think she could have fallen off the ridge?" Tom asked as we paused to check our map. I shook my head. "Unlikely. Hank said she's done this hike many times. She'd know to be careful there. We pressed on, our eyes scanning the ground for any sign of disturbance. A broken twig, a scuff mark, anything that might indicate Claire had passed through. But the forest floor was frustratingly pristine. As the hours ticked by, my concern grew. We should have found some trace of her by now. Even if she had gotten turned around, she should have eventually made her way back to the main trail. It was late afternoon when we reached the ridge. The view from up here was breathtaking. Miles of unbroken forest stretching out to the horizon, the mountains looming in the distance. On any other day I might have paused to admire it, but today all I could think about was Claire, lost somewhere in that vast expanse of wilderness. "James," Tom called out, his voice tight. "You need to see this." I hurried over to where he was crouched near the edge of the ridge. At first I didn't see what had caught his attention, but then I noticed it. A small scrap of red fabric caught on a thorny bush. "You think it's from her scarf?" Tom asked as I carefully untangled the fabric. I nodded grimly. "Looks like it, but why would she have come this close to the edge?" We searched the area thoroughly, calling Claire's name with renewed urgency, but there was no response, no other sign of her passage. As the light began to fade, we were forced to make a difficult decision. It wasn't safe to continue searching in the dark, especially in such treacherous terrain. "We need to head back," I said, hating the words even as I spoke them. "We'll come back at first light with more people." Tom nodded, his face etched with worry. "I don't like leaving her out here, James." "Neither do I replied. "But we won't do her any good if we get lost or injured ourselves." We made our way back to the trailhead in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. I couldn't shake the image of Claire, alone in the darkening forest. Was she hurt? Lost? Or had something more sinister befallen her? Hank was still at the parking lot when we returned, pacing back and forth. The hope in his eyes when he saw us approach quickly turned to despair when he realized Claire wasn't with us. "You didn't find her," he said, his voice hollow. I put a hand on his shoulder. "We found a piece of fabric that might be from her scarf. We'll go back out at first light with more searchers. We'll find her, Hank." He nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes. "Can I come with you tomorrow?" I hesitated. Having family members join searches could be complicated. They often pushed themselves too hard, took unnecessary risks. But I could see the determination in Hank's face. "All right," I said. "But you follow our lead, understood? No going off on your own." He agreed readily, and we made plans to meet back at the trailhead at dawn. As Tom and I drove back to the station, the forest seemed to loom around us, darker and more menacing than I'd ever seen it. That night, as I lay in bed next to Sarah, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Claire, lost and alone in the woods. And beneath that worry was a growing sense of unease. A feeling that we were missing something, that there was more to Claire's disappearance than a simple hiking accident. Little did I know how right I was, or how much our lives were about to change. The next morning dawned gray and misty. I was already awake when my alarm went off at 4:30 a.m., having barely slept. Sarah stirred beside me as I got up. "Be careful out there," she murmured, her eyes still heavy with sleep. I leaned down and kissed her forehead. "Always am. I'll call you when I can." The drive to the station was eerily quiet. The streets of Millbrook were empty, the shops dark. Only the 24-hour diner showed any signs of life. A lone truck driver visible through the window, nursing a cup of coffee. Tom was waiting for me at the station, along with 4 volunteers. Mike and Sarah Johnson, a married couple who ran the local hardware store, and brothers Pete and Dave Thompson, who worked as loggers. All of them had search and rescue training, and I was glad to have them with us. We went over the search plan, dividing the area into grids. We'd start from where we'd found the scrap of fabric and work our way outwards. I stressed the importance of staying in radio contact and not taking any unnecessary risks. "Remember," I said as we finished our briefing, "our priority is finding Claire, but we also need to make sure all of us get home safe. Any questions?" There were none. We loaded up our gear and headed out to the trailhead. Hank was already there when we arrived, looking like he hadn't slept a wink. I couldn't blame him. The worry etched on his face made him look a decade older than his actual age. "Any news?" he asked as soon as we pulled up. I shook my head. "Nothing yet, Hank. But we've got more people today. We'll find her. We split into 3 teams. Tom with Mike and Sarah, Pete and Dave together, and Hank with me. As we set off into the misty forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something we didn't understand. The morning passed slowly. We combed through the underbrush, calling Claire's name until our voices were hoarse. But the forest remained stubbornly silent. It was around noon when we stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. We were about a mile from where we'd found the scarf, in an area of particularly dense undergrowth, when Hank called out, "James, over here!" I pushed through a thicket of brambles to find Hank crouched over something on the ground. As I got closer, I saw what had caught his attention, a small clearing, maybe 10 feet across, where the undergrowth had been flattened. "Could be where she camped," Hank said, hope creeping into his voice. But as I surveyed the scene, I felt a growing sense of unease. This didn't look like any campsite I'd ever seen. There was no sign of a fire, no discarded food wrappers or water bottles, and the way the vegetation was flattened, it looked more like something had thrashed around here. "Hank," I said slowly, "did Claire have a tent with her?" He shook his head. "No, just her day pack. Why?" I didn't answer immediately, my eyes scanning the clearing. That's when I saw it, a glint of metal half hidden under a fallen leaf. I walked over and carefully brushed the leaf aside. It was a small gold locket. Hank let out a choked sound when he saw it. "That's Claire's," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I gave it to her on our 20th anniversary." I bagged the locket carefully, my mind racing. This clearing, the way the vegetation was flattened, the lost locket, none of it made sense for a hiker who had simply gotten lost. "Hank," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "I need you to think carefully. Is there any reason Claire might have left the trail? Any place out here she might have wanted to visit?" He shook his head, confusion and fear warring on his face. "No, nothing. She always stuck to the trail, said it wasn't worth the risk of getting lost." I nodded, keying my radio. "Tom, Pete, you copy?" "Go ahead, James." Tom's voice crackled back. "We found something. A clearing about a mile northeast of where we found the scarf. Looks like there might have been some kind of disturbance here. We also found Claire's locket." There was a moment of silence before Tom replied, "Copy that. We'll head your way. Pete, Dave, you get that?" "Yeah. We're on our way," Pete's gruff voice came through. I turned back to Hank, who was staring at the clearing with a mixture of hope and dread. "We'll find her," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "This is the first real clue we've had." But as we waited for the others to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were dealing with something far more sinister than a lost hiker. When Tom arrived with Mike and Sarah, followed shortly by Pete and Dave, we did a thorough search of the clearing and the surrounding area. But aside from the flattened vegetation and Claire's locket, we found nothing. "What do you think happened here, James?" Tom asked quietly, pulling me aside. I shook my head. "I don't know. But whatever it was, I don't think Claire left this clearing voluntarily." Tom's face paled. "You think someone took her?" "I think we need to consider all possibilities," I replied grimly. "Let's expand the search. Whatever happened here, it can't have been too long ago. The vegetation hasn't had time to spring back up." We split up again, this time spreading out in a wider arc around the clearing. I paired Hank with Tom this time, worried about how he might react if we found anything else. As the afternoon wore on, the forest seemed to grow darker, the shadows deeper. The trees loomed over us, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. More than once I caught myself jumping at the snap of a twig or the rustle of leaves. It was nearing dusk when my radio crackled to life. "James, it's Pete. You need to see this." Something in his voice sent a chill down my spine. "Where are you?" "About half a mile northwest of the clearing. There's a cave here." I quickened my pace, pushing through the underbrush. "I'm on my way." Everyone else converged on Pete and Dave's location. When I arrived, I found Pete and Dave standing at the mouth of a small cave, half hidden behind a curtain of vines. The entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. "Did you go inside?" I asked, catching my breath. Pete shook his head. "No, we waited for you. But James, we found this." He held out his hand. In it was a torn piece of blue fabric, the same color as the t-shirt Claire had been wearing. By now, the others had arrived. Hank let out a strangled cry when he saw the fabric. "That's Claire's shirt," he said, his voice breaking. "We have to go in there." I held up a hand. "Hold on, Hank. We don't know what's in there. We need to be careful." I turned to the group. "Tom, you're with me. We'll go in first. The rest of you stay here. If you don't hear from us in 15 minutes, call for backup." Hank started to protest, but Tom cut him off. "James is right, Hank. Let us check it out first." I switched on my flashlight and squeezed through the cave entrance. Tom close behind me. The air inside was cool and damp, with a musty smell that made me wrinkle my nose. As we moved deeper into the cave, the beam of my flashlight revealed something that made my heart skip a beat. There, on the cave floor, were footprints. Lots of them. Some looked human, but others were like nothing I'd ever seen before. "Tom," I whispered, "are you seeing this?" He nodded, his face pale in the flashlight beam. "What the hell made those tracks, James?" Before I could answer, we heard something that made us both freeze. It was a low, guttural sound, somewhere between a growl and a moan, and it was coming from deeper in the cave. "Claire," I called out, my voice echoing off the cave walls. "Claire, are you in here?" The sound came again, louder this time, but it wasn't Claire's voice. It wasn't human at all. "James," Tom said, his voice tight with fear, "I think we should get out of here." I nodded, backing up slowly. "Yeah, I think you're right." But as we turned to leave, my flashlight beam caught something that made my blood run cold. There, scratched into the cave wall, were words. "Help me. It's still here." And below the words was a crude drawing of a creature that looked like something out of a nightmare. We scrambled out of the cave, our hearts pounding. The others were waiting anxiously, Hank practically vibrating with tension. "Did you find her?" he asked as soon as we emerged. "Did you find Claire?" I shook my head, trying to catch my breath. "No, but we found something. Something I can't explain." As I recounted what we'd seen in the cave, I could see the disbelief on their faces. But there was fear there too, a growing realization that we were dealing with something far beyond our understanding. "We need to call in help," I said finally. This is beyond us." But even as I said it, I knew that whatever was happening in these woods, whatever had taken Claire, it was something that no amount of outside help could prepare us for. As we made our way back to the trailhead in the gathering darkness, the forest seemed alive around us. Every shadow held a potential threat, every sound a hidden danger. And somewhere out there, Claire was still missing, along with something else. Something that until today I would have said couldn't possibly exist. Little did I know, our nightmare was only just beginning. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. We called in state police, park rangers, even a team of spelunkers to explore the cave system. But despite all our efforts, we found no further sign of Claire. The cave yielded no more clues beyond what Tom and I had initially discovered. The strange footprints, the scratched message, even the unsettling drawing, all were documented, photographed, and analyzed. But no one could offer a satisfactory explanation for what we'd seen. Hank was a wreck. He barely ate or slept, spending every waking moment at the search base we'd set up near the trailhead. I tried to convince him to go home and rest, but he refused. "I can't leave," he said, his eyes red-rimmed and haunted. "What if she comes back and I'm not here?" I couldn't argue with him. If it were Sarah out there, wild horses couldn't have dragged me away. It was on the 5th day of the search that things took an even darker turn. I was at the base, poring over maps with Tom, when my radio crackled to life. "James." It was Mike Johnson's voice, tight with barely controlled panic. "James, we need help. Something's happened to Sarah." I was on my feet in an instant. "Mike, what's going on? Where are you?" "We're about 2 miles east of the cave," Mike replied, his voice shaking. "We were searching the area when... God, James, I don't know what happened. One minute she was right behind me, and the next..." "Hang tight, Mike," I said, already grabbing my gear. "We're on our way." Tom and I, along with a state trooper named Rodriguez, headed out immediately. As we crashed through the underbrush, my mind was racing. What could have happened to Sarah? She was an experienced hiker and search and rescue volunteer. She wouldn't have just wandered off. We found Mike about 20 minutes later. He was standing in a small clearing, his face ashen, his hands shaking as he clutched his radio. "Mike," I said, approaching him slowly. "What happened? Where's Sarah?" He turned to me, his eyes wide with fear. "She's gone, James. Just gone. We were walking, and I heard her scream. When I turned around, there was nothing. Just this." He held out his hand. In it was Sarah's radio, smeared with what looked horribly like blood. "Jesus," Tom muttered, taking the radio and bagging it carefully. "Mike, did you see anything? Hear anything?" Mike shook his head. "Nothing. Just Sarah's scream. And then, silence." We searched the area thoroughly, but found no trace of Sarah. No footprints, no broken branches. Nothing to indicate which way she might have gone, or been taken. As we widened our search, the forest seemed to close in around us. The trees loomed overhead, their branches casting strange, shifting shadows. More than once I caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. It was nearing dusk when Rodriguez called out, "Over here! I found something." We hurried over to where he was standing, at the base of a large oak tree. There, carved into the trunk, were words that made my blood run cold. "It's hungry. Run." Below the words was the same crude drawing we'd seen in the cave. "What the hell is going on here?" Rodriguez asked, his hand instinctively moving to his holstered weapon. I shook my head, unable to find words. Whatever we were dealing with, it was clear now that it wasn't just Claire who was in danger. It was all of us. We made our way back to the base as night fell, the forest alive with sounds that seemed far more menacing than they had just days ago. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. When we arrived, we found the base in chaos. While we'd been out searching for Sarah, 2 hikers had gone missing from a trail on the other side of the forest, and a local farmer reported that something had attacked his livestock, leaving behind carcasses that had been torn apart with almost surgical precision. As I stood there listening to the reports flooding in, I felt a weight settling onto my shoulders. This was no longer just a search and rescue operation. We were facing something dangerous, something that defied explanation. I pulled Tom aside. "We need to call in more help," I said, keeping my voice low. "Whatever this is, it's spreading. We're out of our depth here." Tom nodded grimly. "Who do we call? The FBI?" I shook my head. "I'm thinking, look, this is going to sound crazy, but I think we need to call in some experts on unusual phenomena." Tom's eyebrows shot up. "You mean like ghost hunters? Bigfoot chasers?" "I mean people who deal with things that can't be easily explained," I replied, because right now, I'm fresh out of explanations. As I made the call, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the precipice of something monumental, something that would change not just our town, but our understanding of the world itself. Little did I know just how right I was. The experts arrived 2 days later. Dr. Elena Vasquez was a cryptozoologist from the University of Washington, and her partner, Dr. Marcus Chen, specialized in folklore and urban legends. They pulled up to our makeshift command center in a battered Jeep loaded down with equipment I couldn't even begin to identify. "Mr. Jones?" Dr. Vasquez said as she approached, her hand outstretched. "I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez, and this is my colleague, Dr. Marcus Chen. We came as soon as we got your call." I shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the keen intelligence in her eyes. "Thank you for coming. I know this all must sound pretty far-fetched." Dr. Chen interrupted with a wry smile. "Mr. Jones, we've heard far-fetched. This sounds fascinating." We spent the next few hours bringing them up to speed on everything that had happened. They listened intently, occasionally exchanging glances that I couldn't quite interpret. "And you're certain about the footprints in the cave?" Dr. Vasquez asked, her brow furrowed in concentration. "They were definitely not human or any known animal." I nodded. "I've been tracking animals in these woods for over 30 years. I've never seen anything like these prints." Dr. Chen was leafing through the photos we'd taken. "And this drawing," he said, holding up the picture of the crude image from the cave. "You've seen it twice now?" "3 times, Tom corrected. "We found another one carved into a tree where Sarah Johnson disappeared." The 2 scientists exchanged another one of those unreadable glances. "Mr. Jones," Dr. Vasquez said slowly. I think we need to see this cave for ourselves. We set out early the next morning. In addition to the two scientists, I brought along Tom and Rodriguez. Hank had wanted to come, but I managed to convince him to stay behind. The poor man was running on fumes, and I was worried he might do something rash if we found anything in the cave. The forest seemed different now. The familiar trails felt alien. Every shadow potentially hiding some unknown threat. Even the bird song seemed muted, as if the wildlife could sense the wrongness that had invaded their home. As we approached the cave entrance, Dr. Vasquez pulled out a strange device that looked like a cross between a Geiger counter and a transistor radio. It emitted a soft, pulsing hum as she waved it around the cave mouth. Interesting, she murmured. Marcus, are you getting this? Dr. Chen nodded, his eyes fixed on a tablet he was holding. Definitely not baseline. This is, well, it's not like anything we've seen before. Care to share with the class? Rodriguez asked, his hand resting uneasily on his holstered weapon. Dr. Vasquez looked up, seeming almost surprised to remember we were there. Oh, of course. This device measures certain, let's call them anomalies in the local environment. Electromagnetic fluctuations, quantum irregularities, that sort of thing. And right now it's indicating that this cave is practically humming with unusual energy. I exchanged a glance with Tom. This was starting to sound less like science and more like science fiction. We entered the cave cautiously, our flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. The air was cooler inside, with that same musty smell I remembered from before. But now there was something else. A faint metallic tang that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Dr. Vasquez's device was humming louder now, its display flashing with symbols I didn't understand. Dr. Chen was taking samples of the cave wall, carefully scraping tiny amounts into labeled vials. We reached the spot where Tom and I had seen the strange footprints and the scratched message. But to our shock, both were gone. The cave floor was smooth, undisturbed, and the wall where the message had been was blank. This is impossible, I said, running my hand over the smooth stone. It was right here. Tom, you saw it too, right? Tom nodded, his face pale in the flashlight beam. Yeah, it was definitely here. How could it just disappear? Dr. Vasquez was waving her device over the area, her brow furrowed in concentration. This is unprecedented, she murmured. The energy readings here are off the charts. Suddenly, her device emitted a high-pitched whine. At the same moment, we all felt it, a deep subsonic rumble that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. What the hell was that? Rodriguez asked, his voice tight with tension. Before anyone could answer, we heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold. It was the same guttural, inhuman noise Tom and I had heard on our first visit to the cave. But this time, it was louder, closer, and it was coming from deeper in the cave. We need to get out of here, I said, already backing towards the entrance. Now. But as we turned to leave, our flashlight beams caught something that stopped us in our tracks. There, on the cave wall, words were appearing as if carved by an invisible hand. Too late, it's here. And below the words, that nightmarish drawing began to take shape. We ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. We ran as fast as we could, scrambling out of the cave and into the fading daylight. But even as we emerged, gasping for breath, we all knew it. Whatever was in that cave, whatever had taken Claire and Sarah, and who knows how many others, it wasn't content to stay hidden anymore. It was coming for us all. The mood back at the command center was tense. News of what had happened in the cave had spread quickly, and I could see the fear in everyone's eyes. Even the usually unflappable Tom looked shaken. Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Chen had sequestered themselves in a corner, poring over their data and speaking in hushed, urgent tones. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but their expressions were grim. Hank approached me, his eyes wild with a mixture of hope and fear. James, what happened out there? Did you find anything about Claire? I hesitated, unsure of how much to tell him. But Hank deserved the truth, no matter how strange or terrifying it might be. Hank, I said, leading him to a quiet corner. I'm not sure how to explain this, but something's happening in these woods, something I can't explain. I told him everything. The disappearing footprints and message, the strange energy readings, and the words that had appeared on the cave wall as if by magic. As I spoke, I watched the color drain from Hank's face. "What are you saying, James?" he whispered. That some kind of monster took Claire?" Before I could answer, Dr. Vasquez approached us. Her face set in a grim expression. "Mr. Jones, Mr. Miller, I think we need to talk. All of us." She gathered everyone in the command center, the search and rescue team, the state troopers, even the volunteers. Once we were all assembled, she took a deep breath. "What I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible," she began. "But I assure you it's very real and very dangerous." Dr. Chen stepped forward, holding up a tablet displaying a series of complex graphs and charts. "Our readings from the cave, combined with the eyewitness accounts and physical evidence, all point to one conclusion," he said. "We're dealing with a trans-dimensional entity." A murmur of confusion rippled through the group. "A what?" Rodriguez asked, voicing what we were all thinking. Dr. Vasquez held up a hand for silence. "A being from another dimension," she explained. "A reality parallel to our own, but fundamentally different. Somehow a doorway has opened between our world and theirs, allowing this entity to cross over." I felt my head spinning. This sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, not real life. But after what I'd seen in that cave, I couldn't dismiss it outright. "So what does this entity want?" Tom asked, his voice tight with tension. Dr. Chen's expression was grim. "Based on the pattern of disappearances and the messages left behind, we believe it's feeding, gathering energy or life force from our world to sustain itself." A chill ran down my spine as the implications of his words sank in. Claire, Sarah, the missing hikers. They weren't just lost. They had been taken, consumed. "How do we stop it?" I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Chen exchanged a look. "We're not sure," Dr. Vasquez admitted. "In theory, if we can locate the dimensional breach, we might be able to close it, trapping the entity on the other side. But what?" Hank demanded, his voice cracking with emotion. "But we don't know what effect that would have on those who have been taken," Dr. Chen finished quietly. "They might be trapped on the other side as well." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around at the faces of my friends and neighbors, seeing the same mix of fear, disbelief, and determination that I felt. "So what do we do?" I asked finally. Dr. Vasquez straightened her shoulders. "We find the breach, we study it, and we figure out a way to close it without losing anyone else." It sounded impossible, but as I looked around at the determined faces surrounding me, I knew we had no choice. Whatever this thing was, wherever it had come from, we had to stop it. For Claire, for Sarah, for all those who had been taken, and for those who might be next if we failed. As we began to plan our next move, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were about to embark on the most dangerous mission of our lives. The forest that had been my home for so long had become alien, hostile territory, and somewhere out there a creature beyond our understanding was waiting. The hunt was on, but who, I wondered, was really the hunter, and who was the prey? The next few days were a flurry of activity. Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Chen set up a perimeter of sensors around the area where we'd experienced the most activity, hoping to triangulate the location of the dimensional breach. The rest of us continued our search efforts, but now with a new terrifying awareness of what we might encounter. We moved in groups, never letting anyone out of sight for even a moment. The forest, once so familiar and comforting, now felt like an alien landscape. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound a potential threat. It was on the third day after our encounter in the cave that the sensors picked up something. A massive spike in energy readings, centered on a location about 5 miles northeast of the cave. "This is it," Dr. Vasquez said, her eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and fear as she showed us the readouts. "The breach. It's active." We assembled a team quickly. Myself, Tom, Rodriguez, Dr. Vasquez, and Dr. Chen would go in. Despite my protests, Hank insisted on coming too. "That's my wife out there," he said, his jaw set with determination. "I'm going." As we prepared to head out, I pulled Sarah aside. My wife's face was etched with worry, but she managed a small smile. "You be careful out there, James," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Come back to me." I pulled her close, breathing in her familiar scent. "I will," I promised. We'll end this, tonight. The hike to the location was tense. We moved as quietly as possible, our senses on high alert. As we got closer, I began to feel something. A sort of pressure in the air, like the feeling just before a thunderstorm breaks. You feel that? Tom muttered beside me. I nodded grimly. Yeah, we're getting close. We crested a small hill, and there it was. In a small clearing ahead, the air seemed to shimmer and twist, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. But this was no mirage. As we watched, the distortion grew, stretching and warping until it tore open like a wound in the fabric of reality itself. Through the tear, I caught glimpses of something, a landscape both alien and familiar, like our world reflected in a shattered mirror. And moving within that impossible space were shapes, dark, writhing forms that hurt the eye to look at directly. My God, Dr. Chen breathed. It's beautiful. Beautiful? Rodriguez hissed. It's a nightmare. Dr. Vasquez was already setting up equipment, her hands shaking slightly as she worked. We need to take readings, she said. Figure out how to close it. But before we could do anything, a sound cut through the air. A scream. Human. And terrifyingly familiar. Claire, Hank yelled, starting forward. I grabbed his arm, holding him back. Hank, wait! We don't know what's on the other side. But even as I said it, I knew it was useless. We could all see the figure now, visible through the tear in reality. Claire, or something that looked like her, stumbling towards us with arms outstretched. Help me, her voice called, echoing strangely. Please, help me! Hank tore free from my grasp and ran towards the breach. Claire, he yelled, I'm coming. Hank, no, I shouted, but it was too late. As Hank reached the shimmering border of the breach, a dark shape emerged from behind Claire. It was the creature from the cave drawings, but 1,000 times more terrifying in its reality. A mass of writhing tentacles and too many eyes, it moved with a speed that belied its size. In an instant it had Hank. He screamed, a sound of pure terror that cut off abruptly as the creature pulled him through the breach. No, I yelled, starting forward myself. But Tom and Rodriguez held me back. James, don't, Tom shouted. We'll lose you too. The creature turned its attention to us, a multitude of eyes focusing with alien intelligence. I felt my mind reeling, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. And then it spoke. Not with words, but directly into our minds. A voice that was ancient and hungry and utterly inhuman. More, it said. Need more. Dr. Vasquez was frantically working her equipment. The energy signatures are spiking, she yelled over the now howling wind. If we don't close it now, it'll tear this whole area apart. But Hank, I shouted. Claire, we can't just leave them. Dr. Chen grabbed my shoulder. James, listen to me. If we don't close this now, that thing will come through, and then no one will be safe. I looked back at the breach, at the writhing horror that waited on the other side, at the fading images of Hank and Claire, already being pulled deeper into that impossible space. With a heart full of lead, I nodded. Do it, I said. Close it. Dr. Vasquez activated her device. A high-pitched whine filled the air, and the breach began to shrink. The creature roared in our minds, a sound of fury and frustration. As the tear in reality closed, I caught one last glimpse of Hank and Claire. They were looking back at us, their eyes wide with terror and accusation, and then they were gone. The breach snapped shut with a thunderclap that knocked us all off our feet. For a moment, silence reigned. Then slowly, the normal sounds of the forest began to return. Birds chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze. I got to my feet slowly, my whole body aching. The others were doing the same, all of us shell-shocked by what we'd just witnessed. Is it over? Rodriguez asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Vasquez checked her equipment. The readings are back to normal, she said. I think we did it. But as I looked around at the clearing, now peaceful and ordinary, I felt no sense of victory. We had stopped the creature, closed the breach, but at what cost? Hank was gone, Claire was gone, and who knew how many others, lost to a realm beyond our understanding. As we made our way back to town, I struggled with how to explain what had happened, how to tell Sarah and the others about Hank's fate. how to live with the knowledge of what lurked just beyond the veil of our reality. The forest was quiet now, but I knew I would never see it the same way again. And as the first lights of town came into view, I realized that our ordeal wasn't over. It was just beginning. It's been 5 years since that night in the forest. 5 years since we closed the breach and said goodbye to Hank, Claire, and all the others lost to that other world. Millbrook has changed. The events of that summer left scars on our town that may never fully heal. The forest, once a place of comfort and familiarity, is now viewed with suspicion and fear. Few venture deep into the woods anymore, and those who do always return with haunted eyes. Dr. Vasquez and Dr. Chen stayed for a while, studying the aftermath of the breach. They found lingering energy signatures, echoes of that other world. But gradually, even those faded away. They left eventually, moving on to study other phenomena, other mysteries. As for me, I retired from search and rescue. I couldn't bear the thought of entering those woods again, of facing the memories of what we'd lost. Sarah and I moved into town, away from the forest's edge. But even now, on quiet nights, I sometimes think I hear something. A whisper on the wind, a voice calling from just beyond the veil of reality. Tom stuck it out longer than I did, but even he eventually stepped down. It's not the same, he told me over beers one night. Every time I'm out there, I'm just waiting for something to happen, for that thing to come back. The official story is that Hank and Claire, along with the others who disappeared that summer, were victims of a tragic series of accidents. Wild animal attacks, the reports say. Getting lost in unexplored cave systems. It's easier for people to believe that than the truth. But those of us who were there, who saw what really happened, we know better. We carry the weight of that knowledge every day. Sometimes in my darkest moments I wonder if we did the right thing. If we should have tried harder to save Hank and Claire even at the risk of letting that creature into our world. But then I remember the hunger in its voice, the alien intelligence in its eyes, and I know we had no choice. The breach is closed. The entity is trapped on the other side. But sometimes when I look out at the forest that was once my home, I can't help but wonder, are we really safe? Or is it just biding its time, waiting for another chance to break through? And what will happen when it does? As I sit here, writing down this account of what happened that summer, I realize that it's not just a record of events. It's a warning. Because I know deep in my bones that what we experienced in Millbrook was just the beginning. There are more things in heaven and earth than we can possibly imagine, and some of them are hungry. So to whoever reads this, I say, be vigilant. Watch the shadows, listen to the whispers on the wind, and if you ever find yourself in a quiet forest where the birds have gone silent and the air feels heavy with something you can't quite explain, run. Run and don't look back, because you never know what might be looking back at you. My name is Elwood Gardner, and this happened to me I was a regular guy back then, working a blue-collar job as an electrician in Philadelphia. Life wasn't anything fancy, no big dreams or wild ambitions. My days revolved around work, beer on Fridays, and weekends spent either fixing things around the house or watching the Eagles play. My wife Marla was pregnant with our first kid, and like most young couples starting a family, money was tight. We lived modestly in a small row house in South Philly, carefully counting every dollar as we prepared for the baby's arrival. So when my buddy Calvin offered up his family's cabin in the Poconos for a week, I jumped at the chance. The timing seemed perfect. A week away from the city's constant noise and pressure might give me the clarity I needed about impending fatherhood. Calvin had to bail at the last minute due to some work emergency, but he insisted I take the keys and go anyway. I packed up my old Chevy pickup with supplies and headed out, promising Marla I'd be back before she even started to miss me. She laughed and made me promise to call every day, patting her growing belly as she waved goodbye from our front steps. The drive up was peaceful, just me and the open road winding through dense forests and up into the mountains. When I finally arrived, I found the cabin was everything you'd expect from a rustic mountain retreat. A cozy little place perched on the edge of a small, serene lake called Lake Willow. It had a wraparound porch that creaked with every step, a stone fireplace that dominated the main room, and that distinct musty smell of old wood and decades of memories that you only find in places like this. Walking through the door felt like stepping back in time, and I immediately fell in love with its simple charm. Those first couple of days were exactly what I needed. I spent my time fishing off the dock, hiking the surrounding trails, and reading old magazines I found stacked in a corner of the cabin. The silence was profound. No car horns, no neighbors arguing, no phones ringing. Just the whisper of wind through the trees, and the occasional call of a bird. In the evenings I'd sit on the porch with a beer, watching the sun set over the lake. One night I even dug out an old guitar from the cabin's storage closet, and tried to remember the chords I'd learned in high school. It was the kind of peaceful existence I hadn't realized I'd been craving. Everything changed on the third day. I was in my usual spot on the porch, nursing a beer, and watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, when I caught movement in the tree line across the lake. At first I didn't think much of it. These woods were full of deer and other wildlife, but something about this was different. The shape I saw moving between the trees was too fluid, too deliberate in its movements. It was nearly dark by then, so I couldn't make out any details, just a dark silhouette that seemed to slip between the trees with an unnatural grace. When I squinted to get a better look, it vanished, leaving me with an uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. That night sleep proved elusive. Every sound from outside seemed amplified. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, and occasionally something that sounded almost like footsteps circling the cabin. I kept telling myself it was just normal forest sounds, but deep down, I knew something was different. These noises had a purpose to them, a pattern that spoke of intelligence rather than random animal movements. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I was just letting my imagination run wild in the unfamiliar silence of the woods. The next morning I found the tracks. They circled the entire cabin, deep impressions in the soft earth that stopped me cold when I first spotted them. These weren't the familiar prints of any animal I knew. They were massive, wider than my hand, with distinct claw marks at the ends that sent a chill down my spine. I took several photos with the disposable camera I'd brought along, trying to document what I was seeing while simultaneously attempting to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear, I thought, even though I knew bear tracks didn't look anything like this. These prints spoke of something else entirely, something that shouldn't exist in these woods or anywhere else. Unsettled by my discovery, I decided to drive into town. Millvale was the nearest settlement, a tiny place about 30 minutes away that consisted of little more than a general store, a diner, and a handful of houses clustered around a single intersection. I restocked my supplies at the store and then headed to the diner, hoping to casually ask around about any unusual animal sightings in the area. The place was nearly empty except for an old-timer at the counter, the kind of local fixture you find in every small town, wearing a threadbare trucker's cap and reading yesterday's newspaper while nursing a cup of coffee. I took the stool next to him and ordered my own coffee, then carefully broached the subject of the tracks I'd found. "I'm staying out at a cabin on Lake Willow," I said, trying to sound casual. "Been seeing some strange tracks around, bigger than anything I'm familiar with. Any idea what might be making them?" The way he looked at me then made my blood run cold. His weathered face grew serious, and he set down his coffee cup with deliberate slowness. "Lake Willow, you say?" He studied me for a moment before continuing. "Ain't many folks go out that way anymore. Not since the disappearances." That single word, disappearances, hung in the air between us like smoke. He went on to tell me about how, a couple of years back, several people had vanished in those woods without a trace. Search parties found nothing. No bodies, no evidence of what happened to them. Local authorities blamed it on wild animals or unfortunate accidents, but the old-timer's tone suggested he believed something else entirely. When I returned to the cabin that afternoon, I found myself viewing it differently. The cozy charm had been replaced by something more ominous. Every shadow seemed deeper, every unexpected sound more threatening. I spent the rest of the day securing the windows and doors, building up a substantial fire in the fireplace, and trying to convince myself I was overreacting. But as darkness fell, the noises began again. Closer this time, more deliberate. Something was out there, moving around the cabin, testing its defenses. Around midnight, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of claws scratching at the front door. My heart hammered in my chest as I crept closer, clutching a kitchen knife in one hand and a flashlight in the other. Through the peephole I could see nothing but darkness. Yet the scratching continued, slow and methodical, as if whatever was out there knew exactly what it was doing. When I flipped on the porch light, I caught my first real glimpse of the creature. A tall, hunched figure with impossibly long limbs and eyes that glowed a sickly yellow in the darkness. It let out a sound that was unlike anything I'd ever heard. A low, guttural growl that seemed to bypass my ears and vibrate directly in my chest. Panic took over. I knew I had to get to my truck, which was parked just a few yards from the front door. It was a desperate plan, but it was my only chance. Taking a deep breath, I threw open the door and ran for it. The creature's roar behind me was deafening, and I could hear its heavy footfalls as it gave chase. I fumbled with my keys, managing to unlock the truck door just as the thing reached me. It slammed into the side of the vehicle with incredible force, its claws leaving deep gouges in the metal, but I didn't stick around to see what it would do next. I cranked the engine and floored it, spraying gravel as I tore out of there. I drove straight to the Millvale police station, where I met Sheriff Hank Briscoe. He listened to my story with the patient skepticism of a man who'd heard similar tales before, but something in my terrified state must have convinced him to at least check it out. He sent 2 deputies to investigate the cabin, though he warned me not to expect much. I spent that night in Millvale's only motel, jumping at every sound and watching the door until dawn. The next morning, Sheriff Briscoe called to tell me they'd found nothing at the cabin except for the scratches on my truck and the door. No tracks, no evidence of any creature. He suggested kindly but firmly that I head back to Philadelphia and try to forget about the whole thing. But how could I forget those eyes, that sound, the way it moved? I knew what I'd seen was real, even if I couldn't explain it. I decided to cut my trip short and return home to Marla. The whole drive back, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that thing following me. Weeks passed, and I tried to focus on preparing for the baby's arrival, but the memory of that night haunted me. Then Calvin called, sounding shaken. He'd finally made it up to the cabin and found my disposable camera. When he showed up at my house with the developed photos, my hands trembled as I looked through them. The tracks were there, clear as day. But the last photo stopped my heart. A close-up shot of those yellow eyes staring directly into the camera. A shot I knew I hadn't taken. Years went by, and life moved forward. Marla gave birth to our son Jake, and we built a good life together. I never told her the full story of what happened at Lake Willow, and Calvin and I made an unspoken agreement to never discuss it. But I kept those photos locked away in my desk drawer. A reminder that there are things in this world that defy explanation. Then, just last week, I saw a news report about another disappearance near Lake Willow. A group of campers had vanished, leaving behind a campsite that looked like it had been ravaged by something powerful and vicious. As I watched the report, I felt a familiar chill run down my spine. I knew then that I couldn't ignore it any longer. Whatever that thing was, it was still out there, still hunting. I loaded up my truck with supplies and a hunting rifle I'd bought after my first encounter, and headed back to the Poconos. The old-timer was still at the diner in Millvale, looking like he hadn't moved from his spot in all these years. He recognized me immediately, nodding slowly as I walked in. "Back again, huh?" he said. "Figured you'd stay away after what happened." I told him about the recent disappearances, about my need to end this thing once and for all. He just looked at me for a long moment before saying, "Be careful out there. Whatever it is, it's dangerous." The cabin hadn't changed much, though it looked more weathered, more forgotten. I set up inside, built a fire, and waited with my rifle ready. As night fell, the familiar sounds began. The scratching, the movement around the cabin. This time, I was prepared. When I heard it at the door, I didn't hesitate. I threw it open and found myself face to face with the creature from my nightmares. Those yellow eyes locked onto mine, and it let out that bone-chilling growl I remembered so well. I opened fire, the rifle's report echoing across the lake. The first shot hit it square in the chest, making it stumble back but not fall. I kept firing until the magazine was empty, and finally the creature collapsed. Even in death, it was unlike anything I'd ever seen, a twisted amalgamation of features that shouldn't exist together, something that defied classification. I called Sheriff Briscoe the next morning. This time there was no denying what had happened. They took the body away for examination, though I never heard what conclusions, if any, they reached. The disappearances stopped after that night, and gradually people started returning to Lake Willow. Now, years later, as I sit here telling this story, I still think about that old-timer in the diner and his cryptic warnings. He knew something was out there, something that didn't belong in our world. I don't know what that creature was, or where it came from, but I know this: It's gone now, and the woods around Lake Willow are safer for it. I finally told Jake the whole story when he was old enough to understand. He didn't believe me at first, but the photos don't lie. I keep them as a reminder that sometimes the things we're afraid of in the dark are real, and sometimes it falls to ordinary people to face them. So if you ever find yourself near Lake Willow, keep your eyes open and your doors locked, and if you hear scratching in the night, remember my story. Remember that there are things in this world we can't explain, but we can face them, if we have to.